Here is Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia. The Indonesians are celebrating their traditional festival. In Indonesia, people of different races, cultures and faiths enjoy equal freedom in celebrating their festivals in ways they like. They can also take such opportunities to express their views freely. Indonesia is made up of more than 17,500 islands. With a population of more than 240 million people, it is the world's fourth most populated nation. Between the Asian and Australian continents, and as a gateway of the Indian and Pacific Oceans, Indonesia is situated at a very important strategic location. Indonesia is a shipping hub between East and West, and it flourishes spices. In early 17th century, the Dutch Indian Company sent fleets to occupy Indonesia and monopolized spice trade in the region. This building, located in northern Jakarta, used to be the headquarters of the Dutch East Indian Company. During this time, Holland began its colonial rule over Indonesia. The Dutch colonial government forced the people to grow crops that were beneficial to Holland's economy. The Indonesians paid heavy taxes too. At the same time, all anti-Dutch armed forces were suppressed. Opportunities for Indonesia to become independent from Dutch rule did not occur until World War II. During World War II, the Japanese troops launched a war of aggression in the Pacific region and named it Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. In March 1942, they occupied Indonesia after landing Java Island. At that time, the Indonesians thought that Japan would help Indonesia to become independent after ending Dutch colonial rule. Unexpectedly, Japanese rule in Indonesia was even more dictatorial than Dutch colonial rule. Putu was born in Bali in 1939. His family lived on farming. They suffered much oppression during Japanese occupation.
Dan pada waktu itu,
we lived near the road and the camps of the Japanese troops. When night fell, I always heard noise of trucks coming and going on the streets. I asked my parents what happened. They whispered into my ear that the Japanese troops had snatched foodstuffs from the farmers and were then transporting them to the camps.
In early 1945, Japan's situation in the war worsened drastically. The Japanese military government of occupation appointed Sukarno, an independence advocate, to head a preparatory committee for independence. 3 days after Japan had declared surrender, Sukarno read out the Indonesian Declaration of Independence, set up the Republic of Indonesia, and became its president. However, the Dutch troops of the Allied forces did not recognize Indonesia's independence, and they took over Indonesia. Immediately, the Sukarno government staged a war against the Dutch troops in various regions.
tentara Belanda ini sering sekali.
The Dutch troops carry out military actions frequently. I still remember that the Dutch soldiers questioned us when they found a handkerchief with red and white colors inside our house, and took that as symbolizing the national flag of Indonesia. The Dutch soldiers arrested my dad, who was retained and cruelly tortured.
In 1949, under international pressure, the Dutch withdrew their forces and recognized the independence of Indonesia. Indonesia joined the United Nations in 1950. In Indonesia, the major religion is Islam. However, behind this mainstream religion, there are more than 300 clans with different traditional beliefs. Their cultures and languages are mutually unintelligible, and there was serious divergence of interests among them. In the early independence years, Sukarno implemented a democratic political system. He set up a parliament, which was formed by general election. The executive was responsible to the parliament, and the president was merely the head of the nation in name. Lacking experiences of democratic rule, regional representatives in the parliament stuck to their own views and some even proposed separation and independence. Factional struggles became more and more severe. The Sukarno government was often beset by riots. In order to stabilize domestic situation, Sukarno outlawed some political parties, implemented centralization, and strengthened the military in 1959. Externally, Sukarno encouraged the unity among developing countries in Asia and Africa. He advocated resistance against imperialism and economic exploitation and refused to carry out the economic embargo imposed on China by the United Nations. All at once, Indonesia became highly influential among developing countries in the world. In terms of economic development, Sukarno took a socialist path by implementing nationalization and confiscating foreign assets. However, there was no remarkable improvement in the living of Indonesian citizens.
The only thing he had done so far is only public speeches, and people started to question him. Hey, no, we cannot only eat your political speeches. We need food, we need water, we need health, education, everything. So I think Sukarno at that time was very afraid that the whole Indonesia will break into pieces. So that's why he made an alliance with the military to keep Indonesia united.
In the evening of 30th September 1965, a group of military men in Jakarta kidnapped and killed 7 senior officers. Major General Suharto sent troops to stabilize the situation and claimed that the September 30th incident was a coup planned by the Communist Party of Indonesia. After the incident, troops were sent to major cities to put the situation under control. A few months later, the parliament passed an act to remove Sukarno from power. Suharto was appointed acting president. He became the second president of Indonesia officially in 1968. The Suharto government classified the Communist Party as an anti-constitutional illegal organization and outlawed it permanently. It also launched a large-scale arrest of the members of the Communist Party. Suharto declared that Indonesia needed political stability for economic development. A new era unfolded.
There were many economic experts, mostly educated in America and mostly in Berkeley University, California. So the nickname for them was Berkeley Mafia, but it's for good. We have so-called 5-year planning. That's very systematically economic planning. It was about infrastructure development and agriculture.
Suharto adopted a friendly foreign policy towards the West. In order to attract foreign loans, he returned Western assets confiscated by the former government. To attract foreign investment, highly favorable policies were adopted. Suharto developed Indonesia's export and industry with its rich natural resources. Taking advantage of the international energy crisis of the 1970s, all export earned Indonesia plenty of foreign exchange. Indonesia thus became the largest economy in the Southeast Asian region. When Dadi graduated from university, it was the golden age of economic development of Indonesia in the 1970s. Indonesia's economy prospered in the early 1980s. It was easy for people to buy estate property and the banking industry also flourished. Professionals changed jobs frequently. All these indicated the vigorous development of the Indonesian economy. At that time, the social climate was good, and so was social order. There was capital construction taking place everywhere. She joined an international consultant firm after graduation and worked to promote the development of foreign capital in Indonesia.
Kemudian pada waktu saya sering ke
At that time, I
Amerika,
often went to the US to attend international conferences. When I told people that I came from Indonesia, they would say, wow, Indonesia is a very promising country, one of the Asian tigers.
Asian tiger.
For the 25 years between 1969 and 1994, the Indonesian economy experienced an annual growth rate of 6.8%. Per capita GDP increased from $70 to $650. Population living under the poverty line decreased from 70 million to 27 million, and the percentage reduced from 60% to 15%. However, the people paid a heavy political price for the economic growth. Suharto allowed only 2 political parties to exist in the government structure. He also appointed military men to be parliament members and heads of government departments. Indonesia came under the complete control of Suharto's military dictatorship. Suharto made use of the September 30th incident to persecute the communists. He imprisoned more than 300,000 people on political grounds with various reasons. Budu was one of the victims. Before Suharto rose to power, he was a teacher and a writer. In 1966, he was accused of joining an art organization with communist connections and was imprisoned for 10 years.
Logika. Dan itu kenyataan.
I was imprisoned for 10 years without trial. Why was I guilty? I was jailed with many people I didn't know, with many intellectuals who had received education from well-known universities both inside and outside the country.
Like other political prisoners, Budu was still deprived of plenty of rights after being released from prison.
Dengan instruksi yang tidak tertulis jelas. Kita bisa ketemu dengan keluarga.
We were allowed to see our family, but if we want to go overseas, we must first obtain the permission of the military and must report to the local forces upon arriving the destination. Control was tight. No one dared to arrange jobs for us, and if any, it was done secretly.
During the time, the Chinese were also affected. Since the Communist Party had closer contacts with the Chinese, Suharto banned the Chinese from participating in politics, using the Chinese language and celebrating Chinese festivities.
And that cooperation between the army and the technocrats, I think, went very well. Went very well economically, but actually in human terms, in social terms, in cultural terms, we pay that economic development dearly.
From the late 1980s onwards, the Suharto family and the military interfered in the nation's economic interests openly and corruptly by demanding enterprises to allocate their shares to his family.
Not real competition at all. It's mostly based on collusion, mostly.
In the 1997 Asian financial crisis, Indonesia suffered a severe blow due to its heavy foreign debts. In early 1998, the Indonesian rupiah devalued to 1/5 of its original worth, per capita income decreased for 50%, inflation surged to 77%, bank runs occurred, enterprises closed down, and 13 million people lost their jobs. Extreme disparity between the rich and the poor had been a problem of Indonesia long before the financial crisis. Government concentrated development on the Java island. In some other places, there are still no supply of electricity and drinking water. Even in capital Jakarta, the most developed place, poverty is also very obvious. In March 1998, university students staged massive demonstrations in Jakarta to protest against the corrupt Suharto from reappointment. The military suppressed the demonstrations with gunshots and killed a number of students. Confrontation was thus intensified. In May, large crowds of rioters accused the Chinese of seizing their economic interests, wantonly committed robberies, arson and raping in Chinese districts, causing death of several thousand Chinese. The anti-Chinese incident intensified people's discontent towards Suharto and caused more people to join the anti-government demonstrations. Demonstrators occupied the parliament and demanded Suharto to step down immediately. Under pressure from the entire nation, Suharto resigned from his presidency, thus ended his 30-plus years of rule. The Vice President Habibie became the next president of Indonesia. After Habibie had succeeded the presidency in 1998, he lifted the ban on political parties, allowed the people to form different political parties, and reformed the system of election. At that time, Arya was just old enough to vote. Like many of the people, he had no confidence in the election after experiencing so many years of totalitarian rule.
Padahal posisinya dia di dalam
I didn't want to vote at first. Later on, my dad told me it was my right as a citizen. and that the general election was to decide the future of our nation and our people. On the whole, I was very pleased. It's the first time I voted. It's something big in my life. I could choose who to be the president of our country.
Abdurrahman Wahid became Indonesia's president in the 1999 general election. He further implemented political reforms. He also eliminated the economic and political influences of the military, lifted the ban on the Chinese language and Chinese customs, and allowed freedom of speech. The Chinese language, which used to be forbidden, could now be displayed openly. Various sorts of newspapers and opinions could be published freely. The nation has gone through fundamental changes. The research center headed by Rizal, a scholar, is a product of the reforms. It conducts researches jointly with foreign academic institutions and proposes reform programs to the government.
Kalau kondisi sekarang jelas
difference from the Suharto time. I think the current situation is that there is greater and greater scope for democracy and personal career to develop. The basic cost of living is high. The government should be able to offer assistance to society. Prices for medicine and health, electricity supply and so on are getting higher, while standard of communication and transport has lowered.
Putu, who was once a political prisoner, can at last publish his works in Indonesia. Now he is a human rights writer, well known at home and abroad.
ini adalah nation Indonesia, sebagian besar penduduk Indonesia yang masih membutuhkan.
The Indonesian people still need more economic, legal, education, and health protection. Some Indonesians die not because they didn't have medicine, but because they didn't know what medicine to buy. Some Indonesians are not clever, not because there is no university, but because they couldn't afford to go to university.
Karena harus membayar.
At national level, we have been able to lay down a very solid and good framework for democracy. At the regional levels, we haven't succeeded in that. But I think now many civil society organizations are working hard to lay down the foundation for democratization.
When Indonesia declared its independence to the world on 17th August 1945, its people were hopeful that they would establish a modernized, free and open country in which they could enjoy equality and harmony. By now, they have walked this path for half a century and experienced ups and downs. While still rebuilding its economy, Indonesia is again heading towards its goal when the republic was founded.